Welcome to Reserve Seating. It is the fourth of 5 weeks of Summer 93 retrospectives, and we're joined by a very special guest this time, rocking the Kane Hodder as Jason's shirt appropriately for Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. This movie was kind of it's weird because, like, it only could have happened at the time that it happened in the sense that I think they were so beaten down as a franchise with what happened with Jason Takes Manhattan that they gave the reins to the movie to a 23-year-old director who ended up saying the last thing that people want to see is Jason stalking a campsite, killing teenagers. So they went in this wholly different direction. Patrick, did you see this in theaters, or like what was your first time seeing Jason Goes to Hell, and what was your history with this movie before this week?
I bought the uncut DVD sometime in the late 90s slash early 2000s, and that was my first time ever seeing it. And I honestly think in this case, watching it uncut makes a big difference. I think
Mhm.
the uncut version is the one you really have to go with, and it wasn't available on Blu-ray for a long time. Thankfully, now it is in that Friday the 13th box that Scream Factory put out. But I've always been a fan of this movie. I think it's really fun. I get why people maybe in 1993 rejected it because they were going to see a Friday the 13th movie and they get this weird hidden riff with barely any Jason in it. And so I totally get it. But now, like, with some hindsight, and we have, at least 11 other Friday the 13th movies, like, why not have one that's just this weird body swap movie and doesn't have a ton of Jason in it? Because I think it's a very entertaining movie.
Patrick, do you think that the fact that which is the Friday Five is the one without Jason, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe the fan base having already kind of gone through that once, maybe was kind of like, oh no, we're doing this again? Like, is that maybe what you think? Like, is that I don't know.
I I can't possibly wrap my head around the fan base because
Right.
Friday 5 doesn't have a character named Jason,
Right.
but like it fully has a Jason. There's a
It
guy in a
is
hockey mask
a
killing
right.
people the entire movie.
Exactly.
I get that he has a different name at the end, spoilers.
Right.
Uh this is very different because this is literally Jason at the beginning, Jason at the end, but otherwise it's just regular people with, a little snaky thing coming out of their mouths.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Rob.
Right, exactly. Just like me. I think this movie's a hell of a lot of fun. I think it's really interesting, really creative, really cool. I've seen all the Friday movies, obviously, but I don't have the emotional attachment that a lot of people have to them. So I can just look at this as, we open with a very traditional, girl being stalked in the camp, and then it turns into gratuitous nudity, and then it turns into this whole bait and switch where we're sort of telling the viewer, like, hey, we're going to approach this a little bit differently with Jason being awesomely blown up by special forces, which is just completely ridiculous, but also as ridiculous as anything else in the franchise. This movie doesn't go like meta. It's not Scream. You know what I mean? It's not. It's
No.
not New Nightmare where it's like metatextual and commenting on itself constantly. But it is. I feel like trying to add something new to the Friday formula with the body swapping and the mystical dagger and like all the other sort of the way that he can transpose his form, and adding those little bits of mythology in there sort of retroactively. The movie has a really cool approach to its effects. I mean, the big effect, I like the melting man.
Yeah.
I think that effect is really cool outside the context of the Friday legacy and lore and just enjoying it as its own thing. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was not a fan of this movie until 2 days ago. I watched it like it was kind of a sleepover tape
Yeah.
back in junior high. And I remembered a few things like the opening being really awesome because you get like this giant action sequence that's atypical of, but based on, I rewatched the trailer for Jason Goes to Hell because it was on my DVD, and it promises you like we're turning it up to 11. This movie's
Right.
pure metal carnage and rage and stuff like that. So you're out of the gate and you're like, I'm getting what I promised. For some reason, I definitely remembered Rusty Schwimmer and Leslie Gordon or Leslie Jordan. They are very memorable and very quirky, and kind of are the most like Friday the 13th-ish part of this movie. I read an essay in one of the horror guides that I have, and I'm forgetting the name of the author, but he had a really interesting observation that this movie feels more like Michael Myers mythology on Jason. And he kind of was counting like the Stephen Williams part and stuff like that. And then the Voorhees house, which
The
was never
house.
like canon before this and things like that. So I think it's interesting because this movie almost feels like not a like a reaction against a lot of things that weren't working. So it's like they didn't want to do Jason Takes Manhattan again. They didn't maybe want to do Freddy's Dead, which was sort of like this traditional, watered down to most version of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like, well, what if we did The Hidden, which I guess they were counting on not many people having seen back in '93, and just trying to take it in a completely different direction. And I think what Patrick said is like really, appropriate, where in '93, this could seem like a jump the shark moment for a franchise. But then I kept thinking of like Batman and Robin, where it's like we've had like 5 other Batman movies since then. So Batman and Robin is not, the redheaded stepchild, so to speak, because it didn't kill anything. It's just like this flavor that you might not like. And I think that like Jason Goes to Hell in 2023 exists in a very similar status. It did like a really clever thing for me as 11-year-old, where it's just like they got the stinger at the end with Freddy's glove sticking out of the ground. And there was nothing more exciting to a middle schooler than Freddy's glove coming out of the ground and grabbing Jason's mask. And that like probably kept Fangoria and Starlog like going for another year. I mean, it's just like the message, the little letters at the end of the issues, or the promise of developments with like Freddy versus Jason versus Ash and stuff like that. I mean, that's cynically, it's a little annoying nowadays because everything is sort of, pre-production, promises and things like that. But like back then, it was really kind of fun and stuff, and that was one of the movie's lasting legacies for me. But one thing that'll be interesting for me is just I don't have the I like the Friday the 13th movies more and more as I get older, but I almost always have a different reaction to most of them on every individual visit or revisit watching them. There's a few like 2 and 4 that I always like. And I really liked 5, but I've only seen that one time. But like there's been ones like, that I've liked more or I've liked less. Like last time I watched Jason X, I liked it a lot less than I did before. And now I'm liking Jason Goes to Hell a lot more. So that's one thing that's just kind of fun about revisiting these entries, is like they feel, and something like Jason Goes to Hell like just feels fresh and new and interesting. So
I would
sorry.
consider myself a huge fan of this franchise. Like, of
Yeah.
all the horror franchises, this one's probably my favorite, even though it has almost no actual good movies in it. Like,
Mhm.
2 is arguably a good slasher movie. 4 is arguably a good slasher movie. The rest are all I like almost all of them, but they're not like good.
Right.
But I'm also not precious about it.
Yeah.
So like the mythology in Jason Goes to Hell is dog shit. I mean, it's so stupid. Like,
Yeah.
it's all this midichlorian stuff where like at no point in any of the other Friday the 13th am I ever watching them informed by what I'm told in Jason Goes to Hell, that he has weird demons inside of him that bring him back to life and make him kill, and he can only be killed by a Voorhees, and there's magic daggers. Like, none of that informs any of my other Friday the 13th viewings. It's only when I'm watching this installment that I'm like, sure, I'll go along with you. But by the next one, we're in space and none of this stuff counts, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's one thing that's just kind of nice about Jason Goes to Hell, and really the Friday the 13th franchise as a whole, is like the plot is fairly straightforward. So it gives you a lot of like creative space to just kind of do what you want with it. And the thing that's nice about this world that's built around the Jason Voorhees character is nothing is too big. Like you can do almost anything, and you just be like, yeah, that makes sense in this world. That doesn't seem like too big of a stretch. And they stretched it about as much as they could with Jason Goes to Hell and then Jason X and stuff like that. And it's yeah, I mean, like, some audiences are kind of traditionalists in the sense that they're just like, I want it the way that I remember it. But I don't know. Then, like, you get 30 years out and people come back to these movies and they're just like, you know what? Halloween 3 was cool. Or like,
Right.
you know what? Jason Goes to Hell was cool. Like, they had their own kind of take on things and whatnot. And I like to champion stuff like that too.
I was going to say, look at Creighton Duke in this movie.
Yeah.
When you really examine it, he doesn't, aside from delivering a lot of exposition, he doesn't do anything to further the plot. He's actually pretty inconsequential in this movie. Do I want this movie without him? Absolutely not. Like, he's exactly what you're talking about, Adam, in terms of adding like quirk and character to the movie, even though he doesn't advance the plot. He's just there because it's awesome.
And listen, I mean, I'll attack a movie. I mean, you guys know I'm a writer focused reviewer. Like, I look at the story, like, I love story, I love plot, I love those things, but like, I'm not doing that with this movie. like a movie presents itself in a certain way and you judge it based on that. You judge the movie that you're watching or the movie that it's trying to be. You're not sitting there, I'm not sitting there doing 5-act hero journey structural analysis on this movie. The movie's just awesome. It's just fun. It's got a little critter that comes out of Jason's mouth because it's cool. There's a magic dagger in the third act. Why? Because daggers are awesome.
That was one of the things that endeared me to it very early on when I bought that DVD. Was I listened to the director's commentary, and right away I was like, oh, okay, they know the movie they made. They made what they were trying to make. Like, it put it all in context for me very quickly, which 1993 audiences didn't have the advantage of. I understand that. So I was lucky enough that I could see the movie and then immediately have it contextualized like that. But that helped me a lot to hear Adam Marcus talk about it and be like, oh, they knew exactly what kind of movie they were making.
Yeah, and this movie like feels like the execution of a vision. Like, we talk about like a movie being campy or a movie being silly or a movie where you're not worried about the plot. That doesn't make, like, I think sometimes we use like the word like messy, like, oh, the movie's such a mess. And it's like, this movie's not a mess. This movie's goofy, but it's doing exactly what it means to do. Like you said, like, it's exactly the movie they wanted to execute. Sometimes there are weird logical leaps that tie plot points together, but like, that's not the same thing as like, oh, this movie's incoherent and it makes no sense. The movie makes total sense. It's totally exactly what it intends to be. And again, I think like we're having this conversation sort of reacting off of things we've read that people have said or like whatever. Sort of maybe I'm feeling a little defensive of the movie, even though I don't really have a skin in the game or anything like that. But I just like, I'm a person who likes movies and I think this movie's good.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. I'm glad that we revisited it for this month, because like, for 30 years I was carrying around in my head that it was just kind of a garbage Friday the 13th movie, and I don't feel that way anymore.
Patrick, you've watched these movies 1,000 times. I've listened to you talk about these movies 1,000 hours of my life. Like, when you watch, like, this time when you watched Jason Goes to Hell, was there anything new that you picked up on? Was there any like shift? Was there anything, like, as somebody who kind of knows these movies backwards, was there anything you kind of like picked up on or noticed? Or
I think they really put all their eggs in a couple of baskets. And then everything in between is a little bit like, it's not as good. Like, obviously that opening is killer.
Yeah.
The tent kill is like an all-timer.
Yep.
Freddy and Jason at the end. Like, there are examples of those moments that they really want to hit.
Melty Man.
And then some other stuff is like,
Oh, yeah.
somebody gets their head bonked into a cabinet and they're dead. And you're like, well, that's not the best Friday the 13th kill I've ever seen, especially for a movie with effects by K&B. But that's because they were saving it for like the melting guy whose jaw sticks to the floor. And like, so it has these amazing highs. And that allows me to coast a little bit during some of the lulls.
Patrick, did it move in your rankings at all? Like, where do you have this one?
Not really. I don't remember. I did rank them a couple years ago on Letterboxd. Honestly, the only two movies in this franchise that I'm kind of like, are Jason Takes Manhattan and Part 7, The New Blood. Those are like the two that I am not crazy about.
Right.
The rest of them I like.
So if you're missing the classiness, but also enjoy the trashiness, next week is just for you, because we're talking about Needful Things, which is classier, but still trashy. And then the week after, Man, we're going super classy because it's same title showdown, Man of the House 2005, Tommy Lee Jones versus Man of the House 1995, Chevy Chase, Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
That's a real thing that we're gonna do.
Yeah.
It's gonna be great. I'm so excited. Until then.
Yeah.
These seats can go to hell.
Oh my God, I talked over everyone.
It's coming out of my mouth.
That's okay.